And welcome back to the NFLandU podcast. I'm your host, as always, Hayden Vassar, and welcome to the new year. It's our first show of 2020, and we got a pretty interesting one today, I would say. Going to preview all four of the wild card playoff games today. We're going to debut a new segment, and we have a very special announcement for the end of the show, so please stay tuned for that. So first and foremost, I would like to congratulate everybody. We made it, people. It's postseason time. Only 12 teams are left standing throughout the entire NFL. The best of the best throughout the entire season. I think that's fair to say. I think we did good in getting the best crop of playoff teams. As for the other 20 teams that are currently sitting at home on their couches, they're figuring out draft stock and who should be our new head coach, all this and that, and what went wrong for their season. These teams that are left have a shot at destiny. They got a really, really great shot at destiny. So we're going to get into all of that. We're going to preview the 4 wildcard games, all this and that, talk a little bit about head coaching later. But before we get into all that, I promised that we would reveal how we did in our picks this week. And I tabulated and crunched the numbers. And you ready for this? I hope you're ready. So we went 168. That's how many games we got right. 168. We got 87 games wrong, and we got one tie because, the Lions and Cardinals tied in week 1. So 168, 87, and 1 is our final record. That gives us a winning percentage of .656, and you're thinking, well, what does that mean? For to equate it to something, a team that goes 10-6, like the Minnesota Vikings did this year, their winning percentage is .625, so just slightly below where we finished. But a team that went 11-5 this season gets a winning percentage of .687. So we basically went like 10-6 or 11-5 in our picks, equating it to like a 16-game schedule. So we did really good. We did really, really solid. If we were an NFL team, we would have made the playoffs and been in the running for our division, is what I'm saying. We did pretty solid. I'm pretty proud of ourselves. So next year, we're going to try and get those numbers up. My goal is to actually predict a perfect playoff bracket, but I don't know if I'm going to get it this week. Willing to bet I get a couple wrong. So, like I said, we're going to get into the playoffs, but first I want to talk a little bit about news. At first, I batted back and forth about, if we did a news segment, what would we talk about? And I really wasn't crazy about just saying, Giants are interviewing Chris Richard or stuff like that for 5 minutes. But late Thursday, a news story broke, and now I feel we need to talk about it. If you haven't heard yet, late Thursday afternoon it was announced former Bengals and Bucks head coach Steve Wyche passed away at the age of 74 after a battle with metastatic. I really can't read, and I apologize for that. Metastatic melanoma. And if you're thinking to yourself, I don't know who Steve Wyche is, well, here's who Steve Wyche was, and here's why he should be remembered fondly. Steve Wyche leaves behind a memorable legacy for the Bengals. He was a member of their inaugural team in 1968. He would then go on to become the Bengals head coach from 1984 to 1991. And he had a pretty good run at it while he was there. In that time, he took the Bengals to their then second Super Bowl appearance. They came out on the short end of the stick against Joe Montana's 49ers. That was the last time the Bengals would go to a Super Bowl. And he's also responsible for the very last playoff win for the Cincinnati Bengals when they beat the Houston Oilers 41-14 in the wild card round in January of 1991. So Steve Wyche is kind of remembered as a big deal in terms of coaching for the Bengals. After 91, he would then go to the Buccaneers for a couple years. And while his record in Tampa Bay didn't get close to what it was in Cincinnati, towards the end of the tenure in Tampa Bay, his regime did end up drafting Warren Sapp, John Lynch, a number of cornerstone Buccaneer players that would be there when Tony Dungy would take over in the 90s and would still be there when they won the Super Bowl almost a decade later. So while the record wasn't there when Steve Wyche was the head coach of Tampa Bay, his fingerprints are all over that franchise's lone Super Bowl win. So while there you could go on and on about his coaching legacies and this that, and therefore I really think that Steve Weiss should be remembered as one of the NFL's more entertaining characters of the late 80s and most of the 90s, and arguably delivered one of the greatest mic drop moments in NFL history uh, in the middle of a game. So we're going to go all the way back to December of 1989. I know most of you listening weren't even born yet, but please follow me on this one. And if you can find the YouTube clip on this, it is pure comedic gold. And it is one of the greatest things I've seen in my life. So December of 1989, it was early December. It was a home game for the Bengals. They were playing the Seattle Seahawks. And at some point in the game, the referees made a call that went against the Bengals, and the hometown crowd really didn't appreciate it. So they did what any law-abiding citizens would do. They began to pelt the field with snowballs because it had been snowing in Cincinnati lately. They were just throwing snowballs onto the field. Play had to be stopped. They were trying to regain order. And Steve Weiss somehow got a microphone from, I think it was one of the officials, and turned it on and bellowed out this quote for the entire stadium to hear. Well, the next person that sees anybody throwing anything onto the field, point them out and get them out of here. You don't live in Cleveland. You live in Cincinnati. Just a beautiful, beautiful quote from the then Bengals head coach. And according to some people, that quote is often repeated fondly in Cincinnati because they don't like Cleveland. And that's what I think we should remember Steve Weiss for. As he had those big coaching moments for the Bengals, took them to the Super Bowl, and his blueprint eventually won Tampa Bay a Super Bowl title almost a decade later. But I really think that we should remember him as one of the great and entertaining characters in NFL history. Once again, Steve Weiss, former head coach for the Bengals and Bucks, passed away at the age of 74 late Thursday afternoon. And I know that was more of a somber way to start the show, but I felt it was really worth talking about. Steve Weiss really had an impact on the NFL in the late 80s and early 90s for most of those decades. So I felt it was worth talking about. Now, we're going to try and move on and try to be a bit more positive, but then I just realized what our next segment is, and it's hard to be positive about this next segment. So we've got through news, and I promised we were going to debut a new segment today, and we are. Now that, we're in the playoffs and there's less games to really preview and recap, it gives me more free time to explore doing segments and bits and introducing new things. And that's what I hope to do today. Now, I mentioned it at the end of Tuesday's show that we were going to talk about what's wrong with the NFL head coaching cycle, and that's what this segment is about. This brand new segment is called Let's Get Real. So, I had a script prepared, and I will read from it now. Speaking of coaching, it's time to introduce our newest segment, Let's Get Real. The idea behind this segment is quite simple, actually. Take a topic that is currently popular or gaining traction in the league, and cut through all the BS surrounding said topic, and get to the heart of the true matter. The very first installment of this segment is what's wrong with the NFL coaching system. Now, as we were all getting ready for the final Sunday of the regular season last week, this was the Saturday before said Sunday, I was at home watching the college football playoffs, watching Joe Burrow light up the skies with 7 touchdowns, watching Ohio State and Clemson commit holy war on each other. And I was playing on my phone, and I clicked over to the Athletic app, and if you don't have the Athletic, I highly recommend you get it. If you have any passing interest in sports journalism, it is the greatest source on earth. Is an absolute must-read. And I saw a new article by Michael Lombardi, one of their writers. Now, if you don't know Michael Lombardi, he's worked in the front offices of several teams. I know he worked for the Cleveland Browns at one point. I know he worked for a couple others after that. But Michael Lombardi's article simply stated that the Black Monday that was coming up, Black Monday happens every year where a bunch of coaches get fired, was not really because of the head coaches. Black Monday is more of a result of the owners and their failings. And I really want to expand on this idea because he raised a lot of great points in the article. And if you haven't read it or seen it, I highly recommend going and finding it and reading it because it is well worth your time. To summarize the main points of Lombardi's article, instead of blaming coaches for the rash of firings we experience every year, he lays the blame on the owners. That Black Monday every year is a reflection of the owners and not the coaches. Arguing a good owner needs a couple of things to help his coach succeed. They need common sense, and sometimes it feels like, these owners lack a lot of that. I'm talking specifically about Jerry Jones at this point and how he refuses to fire Jason Garrett. Common sense, also saying that owners need to provide stability for their coaches, not just job security. And he uses the example in the article of Chuck Noll, former Steelers head coach who won multiple Super Bowls in the 70s. Chuck Noll in his first 3 seasons as the Steelers head coach won a combined 12-30. 12-30. If any head coach in the NFL today in his first 3 seasons went 12-30, he would be fired. Chuck Noll did it in the 70s. Steelers kept him on. They decided to be patient. And it paid off as he won, 4 Super Bowls in the 70s? So what he's arguing is, these owners need to be patient. Don't overreact. I lost my place in my notes. But not just, job security patience, but provide assistance to these head coaches who are new to the job. Like, for instance, there's a lot of offensive coordinators and defensive coordinators being talked about for head coaching jobs, like Greg Roman, the Ravens defensive coordinator, all this and that. Eric Bieniemy, the Chiefs offensive coordinator. And, they'll be head coach for the first time. And, there's going to be pitfalls and they're going to need to, learn on the job. Wouldn't it really benefit these new guys who are being a head coach for the first time to have some kind of assistance, some kind of person in the organization that can help them grow as both a coach and a leader? And the article uses the example of saying the Cincinnati Bengals head coach Zach Taylor, because I coughed there for a second, who seems, well over his head in Cincinnati. Wouldn't he really benefit from somebody in the organization helping him develop and grow? It's a really great point. And the last argument that Michael Lombardi says that owners need, they need to care. And when you hear that word, you think, oh, you mean so like when they lose a tough loss, they just immediately start firing people. Not like overreacting after a tough loss, but caring about what is the direction of this team. How are you getting the direction of this team? Are we going in the right place? That kind of care. When you say it like that, you suddenly realize a lot of the owners don't really care, do they? Lombardi made numerous excellent points throughout the article, so let's start with one of the easier ones that exemplifies everything he wrote about. The Cleveland Browns. And I know it's so easy to talk about the Browns. It's like shooting fish in a barrel. It really, really is. Now, for those that aren't an NFL history nerd like me, the new Cleveland Browns became an official NFL franchise in 1999. After the old Cleveland Browns moved to Baltimore and became the Ravens in the mid-90s. So this new Cleveland Browns became a thing in 1999. Since that inaugural season in 99, the Browns have had 11 different head coaches. That's counting the interim ones. 11 different head coaches. 5 of those head coaches only lasted 2 years. 2 were one and dones. I didn't count the interim ones in that because that felt like cheap, being a cheap stat. So, once again, 11 head coaches in 2 years. Not 2 years. 11 head coaches since 99. 5 of them only lasted 2 seasons. 2 of them were one and dones. Those aren't good numbers, in case you couldn't tell. The longest head coaches during the stretch were upwards of 4 years. I think 2 different guys had 4-year tenures in this entire time span. In case you couldn't tell, that's called a lack of patience on the part of the Browns owners, the Haslams. The constant turnover around the Browns has turned them into a perennial joke that they can't escape from. Now, granted, a fair amount of those cases, the coaches weren't good. Freddie Kitchens, for example, looked way in over his head. And he most certainly should have not been the guy that they hired a year ago. And in all honesty, Hugh Jackson, the guy that came before Freddie Kitchens, was also probably not the right hire either. The guy won what, 3 games in 3 years? Those are prime examples of that. So what I'm arguing is, you're going to have patience. Don't be a Cleveland Browns team. Don't fire a coach every 2 years, because that's how you stunt your organization. You get this constant turnover and you become a joke that nobody wants to be a part of. Now, the inverse of that would be, okay, let's give these coaches plenty of time to work things out. There's a problem with that too. You could give a coach an infinite amount of time to, build their system, get their guys in, and make the right hires, all this, that, and thereforth. You could give the coach all this time, and he could end up completely wasting it. Staring directly at Jason Garrett at this point, who has been given 10 years, done nothing with it. That's the opposite of, being impatient. You're being too patient, and you've wasted countless careers in the process. So, where is the line between too little and too much time? Where's the line between, a one and done or a 2-year head coach and a 10-year wasted time period with Jason Garrett? Where is the line between that? I think I have an idea, and I know people aren't going to be crazy about it, that to really give a coach a fair shot and a fair shake, you guarantee that no matter what happens, that no matter how bad it looks, you give the coach 3 full years. Guaranteed. Because the first year is usually almost always considered a mulligan. No matter how bad it looks, it's his first year. He still hasn't got the full system in. Let year 2 be a mulligan as well. Work the kinks out of the system. By the end of year 3, if there's still no progress being made, or going into year 4, or even halfway through year 4, there's regression or there's no progress being made, nobody will blame you if you fire that head coach. Think about it. Let's say head coach for, I don't know, throw dirt at the board, Tampa Bay. Let's say Tampa Bay's head coach, who's Bruce Arians right now, let's say Bruce Arians coaches for another 3 years, and they never progress what they are right now. What they finished the year at, 7-9? What if that is their best record the next 3 years? Nobody will blame you if you fire him 3 years from now. His best record was 7-9. Who could blame him for that? But if you fired him next season, if they went 6-10, people might look at you a little sideways. You only gave him 2 years, all this, that, and thereforth. So that's what I'm beginning to argue, is that that you need to give these coaches some time to at least work. The idea that you guarantee at least 3 years, and then if it's still not working going into year 4 or halfway through year 4, you pull the plug. That sounds fair to me. And nobody will blame you if you fire them. Because look what's going on in Cleveland right now. They fired another head coach after 1 season. And people are killing it. It's the same old Browns. Oh, here we go again. Because they're so impatient. They don't know what they're doing anymore. If you don't have this patience in you, then you end up like Cleveland, in an endless cycle of firing head coaches every 2 years or 1 year, and ignoring the very real problem that is your owners. That's the real problem. You're just addressing a surface level problem, while the real one hides beneath the waters. And I promise you, it's not just the Cleveland Browns owners. There are several owners throughout the league who are terrible, who are downright stupid. How these men became billionaires is beyond me. And then when they get to the NFL, they lack the smallest modicum of sense. Jerry Jones, Dan Snyder, several other owners have done just flat out stupid things within the last 5 years. You could throw a rock and hit an owner who has done something stupid in the last 3, to be honest with you. So here's what we're arguing here. These owners lack patience. I think we can all agree there. They lack common sense. And to a fair degree, a certain amount of them don't really care. Now, once again, when I say care, I don't mean when they lose the last game of the season with the playoffs on the line and it's an ugly loss, they don't just come in and start cleaning house. I don't mean that kind of care. I mean, can any owner honestly say, outside of maybe like 4 to 6 of them, what is the direction of your team? Can they honestly say what it is? I know the Cowboys can't, because Jerry Jones doesn't have one, and that's why they're a true failure, because they don't have a real direction. You could argue that maybe the Giants or Washington doesn't have one. You could throw a dart and hit a team, and their owner really can't answer that question. Now, these aren't really X's and O's kind of people. They're just here to run the team. But they're the boss. This all falls on them. They have ultimate hiring and firing power. They hire the head coach. They hire the general manager. So this ultimately all falls on them, doesn't it? So, I know this was a lot to really talk about that the true failing of the system isn't the head coaches, it's that the owners aren't helping their head coaches succeed as much. But it's a myriad of problems facing the head coaching cycle. And that's what I want to get to, is that there's so many problems, and I wanted to cut through all of that to get to the heart, that it's really just failings of owners repeatedly year after year after year that creates this constant coaching turnover. I mean, my God, we were averaging like 6 head coaches being fired a year before this year. That's what we were doing every single year, firing like 6 to 7 different guys. So when you hear these phrases that we're hearing on the TVs, ever since Monday started, we hear them every single year. This team needs a fresh start. This team needs a clean slate. They need to just start all over. What it really means is that it's giving ownership a new chance to mess things up for their team. Until these owners can figure out how to successfully run a team, these years of firing head coaches in droves, like we've been doing, will continue on like clockwork. It's becoming a freaking cottage industry at this point. Because it's just addressing the surface level problem, and not the real one that's underneath it. So, that was Let's Get Real, our very first Let's Get Real segment. We'll bring that back at some point when I get heated about something else. But, so we've done news, we've done Let's Get Real, we've ranted about the coaching cycle. Now let's get into what everybody's been waiting for. Let's talk game previews. Wildcard weekend is here, and this slate of games is massive. The 4 games this weekend, for a lot of reasons, and not just because it's the playoffs. In 3 out of 4 of these matchups, there's a fair amount hanging in the balance for these teams. Now we're going to go in chronological order. We'll start with the early game on Saturday and end with the late game on Sunday. So that means first game up, it's the number 5 seed Buffalo Bills going to Houston to take on the 4-seeded Texans. This is a massive game for both of these teams, trying to turn back the tide of opinion that they can't win the big one. And you're thinking, what do you mean the Texans can't win the big one? They just won their division. And what do you mean the Bills can't win the big one? I mean, they're like, 10 wins? Here's what I mean. The last time the Bills won a playoff game, I wasn't even born yet. It was December of 95. They've only had one other playoff appearance this century, and that was a loss to the Jaguars, 2-3 years ago? Safe to say they're starving for this win. And then you're going to look at the Texans, who are in a similar situation as these Bills, as playoff missteps have haunted this team for years under head coach Bill O'Brien. Bill became the Texans head coach in January of 2014, okay? Since then, the team has been to the postseason 3 times. And you're thinking, hey, that's pretty good. Well, it is until you look at their record. They have a 1-3 playoff record. That lone win came against the Raiders team that was starting a backup quarterback in place of an injured Derek Carr. The other 3 games, those 3 losses, all losses by double digits. The average margin of defeat in those games is by 20.6 points per game. That means they are just losing. They're getting blown out. In fact, 2 of those losses were home games in the first round. What I'm arguing is the Texans have a reputation here lately of not showing up for these home playoff games. Because the last 2 times it happened, they got embarrassed, blown out in front of their home crowd. And here we are again, first playoff game of the year. This is always the Texans game if they make it. They always get the first one on Saturday. It just feels like they're getting set up to get bounced. Oh. But there's good news for the Texans. While their defense has struggled these last couple weeks, reinforcements are coming on the horizon. J.J. Watt is suiting up for this team. Yeah, that's right. The same guy who tore his pec muscle early in October is now suddenly healthy to go and ready to play. But this guy's a damn freak, and sounds like he's going to be ready to go for this one. That's why he's suiting up. And the Texans defense really needs it, especially after watching Derrick Henry, the Titans running back, go to work on them for over 200 rush yards and 3 touchdowns last week. So they desperately needed reinforcements, and here comes one on the horizon. Texans defense is not good. It hasn't been good for a while. I think if I remember correctly, they were the lowest in total defense out of any of the playoff teams. They were lower than Tennessee. So I think that makes them the lowest. Ooh, that's got to burn, don't it? Ooh, that's got to burn. But here's a matchup to watch if you're into wide receiver corner matchups. Tre'Davious White, who got named to the AP All-Pro first team today. Shows you how great of a season he's had. The Bills corner, Tre'Davious White, feels like the NFL's best kept secret. According to Pro Football Focus, who is the one who generated this next stat, Tre'Davious did not allow a single touchdown while in coverage this season. Not one. That's according to Pro Football Focus, and they watch a lot of football, more than me. So if they say it, it sounds like it's true. Not even Stephon Gilmore, the guy who feels like he's the odds-on favorite to win Defensive Player of the Year, can say that. That's insane. So that means Tre'Davious is going to be matched up with DeAndre Hopkins, a guy who was also named to the AP All-Pro first team today. He's going to be matched up with him all day. And it sounds like Will Fuller, the Texans' number 2 wide receiver, is going to be a game-time decision with another soft tissue injury. Dude just can't stay healthy, can he? So if Will Fuller can't play, or if he's severely hobbled, and DeAndre Hopkins is getting shut down by Tre'Davious White, it could be a very, very long day for the Texans' pass game. Now, what's the Bills' strong suit? They love to play defense, don't they? In fact, they're very good at defense. In case you haven't noticed, they're the number 3 total defense in the league with 298.3 yards per game. That's third best in total D. They're third in the league in scoring defense. They're giving up an average of 16.2 points per game. Translation, that defense can shut down anybody. And yeah, the Bills' offense isn't great. They're not going to light the world on fire, but they don't have to with this good defense. If you're coming into this game expecting a shootout, you need to go to a different game because that's not what this is going to be. So to pick this game, I've been riding the Bills train all year long for most of the year. I did disembark halfway through, but got back on. I'm gonna ride it some more. I'm gonna call for a Bills win in the first playoff game. The Texans have proven that they're a hot and cold team this year, and they're a hot and cold team under Bill O'Brien's entire tenure. I do think Deshaun Watson is going to put up points, and I do think that it's not going to be, a stale, flat shutout like most Texans playoff games. But I just can't trust them. I just can't trust them in a big moment. I've been hurt before by this team. I've seen them just come out and disappoint. Bills' defense is hot. They're getting confidence. If the Texans let them hang around in the second half, Bills are winning the game. And I'm taking the Bills. I just can't trust the Texans. So, according to playoff seeding, that would be an upset. So, there's your first one, according to me. So, now let's move into the late Saturday night game. You got the number 6 seeded Tennessee Titans going to New England to take on the 3 seeded Patriots. You can feel it. You can almost sense it in the air, can't you? You smell that? That smells like upset, don't it? Ooh, that smells like an upset. The Titans are coming into the playoffs as one of the best offenses in the league. Tannehill has the highest yards per attempt out of any of the quarterbacks in the playoffs. Derrick Henry is coming off winning the NFL rushing title after his monster game against the Texans. And A.J. Brown has an insane yards after catch. He should be the leading contender for Offensive Rookie of the Year. In fact, the Titans are so good, they've been averaging 30 points per game since Ryan Tannehill took over at quarterback. Translation, Titans offense is flat out cooking. They're not just cooking, they're setting the world ablaze. On the other side, you have a Pats offense that no one can really, I say it in my notes, take seriously. I'm going to change it to say trust. You can't trust the Pats offense, can you? Think about it like this. Say your life depended on the Patriots putting up, let's say, 28 to 30 points in this game. Do you feel confident about that? I don't. I'm saying their offense, not their defense or special teams. The offense on its own has to put up 28 to 30 points. I'm starting to get the feeling that some of you might be nervous with that proposition. How will this Patriots offense look? Because in a game that they desperately needed last week, Brady threw a pick 6 against the Dolphins. And they weren't necessarily their best. I mean, coming down the stretch, I've only seen the Patriots offense look good once in the last 5 games? And no one knows how this Patriots offense is going to look. It's almost impossible to guess. But the good news for them is the Titans haven't played good on defense in a while. They're 21st in total defense, giving up an average of 359.5 yards per game. So, Brady and this pass game are going to really have to shoulder the burden in this one to help to find a way to win. The Patriots don't have a running game. They haven't had one all season. So if you're looking for that to suddenly just magically appear, I hate to disappoint. Just look for Brady to start slinging it. That's what I would expect. Now, in terms of history, a quarterback making his first playoff start against Tom Brady and Bill Belichick are 0-11. No quarterback making his first postseason start has ever beaten Tom Brady and Bill Belichick. That's bad news because Ryan Tannehill is making his very first postseason start. Oh, and just to confound all of that, only 2 quarterbacks have won in New England in a playoff game against Tom Brady and Bill Belichick. You want to know who they are? Mark Sanchez and Joe Flacco. Now you're thinking, oh, the bar's low if they can do it, but that just shows how rare it is that New England doesn't lose these home playoff games. They just don't. What I'm arguing is that it's extremely, extremely, extremely rare for New England to lose. But I'm going to call for the upset. I've been riding the Titans bandwagon for what feels like months at this point, and I am not going to disembark now. I say Ryan Tannehill and that offense go in there and they just outduel Tom Brady. Now, I know that you're thinking that this Patriots defense is good, and it is, but it can't be good forever if their offense isn't giving them anything. And if Tom Brady and that offense goes out there and puts up, 200 pass yards and maybe 1 touchdown, that's not good enough. That is really not good enough. These Titans can beat you in a multitude of different ways. Derrick Henry running with the ball. Ryan Tannehill running with the ball, which he can do and has had multiple rushing touchdowns this year. Throwing the ball to A.J. Brown. They can do it all. And it just feels like it's way too much for this Patriots offense to hope to go shot for shot with them. I don't think it's going to be a high-scoring affair, but I just can't trust the Patriots offense. They've given you no reason to believe in them. And that's why I'm taking the Titans to win. The Patriots just feel way too off, and Tennessee is great in every area that New England struggles in. And I'm taking the Titans to pull the upset on Saturday night. So, let's move into Sunday now. The first game on Sunday, you got the 6th-seeded Minnesota Vikings going to New Orleans to take on the 3-seeded Saints. This game is a revenge game for the New Orleans Saints. The last time these two teams met in the postseason, the Saints were on the wrong end of one of the most famous plays in NFL history. The Minneapolis Miracle. What was that, the 2017, 2018 postseason? 2017, it has to be, I think. The Minneapolis Miracle by Case Keenum and Stephon Diggs capped off an improbable comeback for the Vikings in Minnesota and sent the Saints home in the divisional round about as heartbroken as a team can be. Now, flash forward. Now the Vikings have to go on the road to the Saints and win a game. And that is very problematic because the Saints' home stadium has taken on a very sinister moniker when it gets to playoff time, being nicknamed the Death Dome by some. That's because New Orleans is 6-1 at home playoff games under Sean Payton. It gets loud, it gets impossible to hear, and they are just a scary, different team at home in the playoffs. It is one of the hardest places to go in and win a game in a playoff game in New Orleans. It is next to impossible. So the big question for the Minnesota Vikings, how will that offense look? The last time we saw them, they were atrociously bad on offense on Monday Night Football. So it's been, 2 weeks since then? How are they going to look? Dalvin Cook, the Vikings running back, says he'll play, but how will he look? Will he be 100%? We don't really know. The same thing could be said for the rest of that Vikings offense. We really won't know until they line up and start playing. Now, that Vikings defense is good and has played well coming into the playoffs, but the real story is going to be their offense and whether they can keep pace with a red-hot Saints offense. Saints offense is averaging 40 points per game the last 4 weeks. I repeat, they are averaging 40 points per game the last 4 weeks. That's juggernaut level of crushing. And while the Vikings defense is good, it will only be a matter of time. They cannot hope to stop this Saints offense. They can only hope to slow them down. It's a very, very tall ask for this Vikings team. Now, this game, let's put it into context. This game could be a massive referendum about the direction of this Vikings team as a whole. You went out and got Kirk Cousins 2 years ago. You signed him to a big deal, a fully guaranteed contract because you believed you were just one player away from going to a Super Bowl. Now here you are. You got to go on the road. It's a big time game. It's time for Kirk to really earn that money, ain't it? So what happens if he goes out there and it's really a bad performance like it was on Monday Night Football, where he puts up 122 passing yards, looks out of it? Then what? And not just your quarterback, there's also your head coach you have to start thinking about. Head coach Mike Zimmer. His contract expires at the end of next season. So decision time is coming. If they lose this game, they will have ended this season on a 3-game losing streak, a season that held a little bit of promise at one point, all of a sudden crumbling into dust at the very end and going out in a whimper. It could leave a very bad taste in a lot of people's mouths and could inform a lot of decisions. I'm not saying that, they're suddenly going to, cut Kirk Cousins and fire Mike Zimmer, but it could potentially lead to, seeds being planted that could result in their ouster a year from now. It's something worth keeping an eye on. So I'm taking the Saints in this one. They're just too good right now. That offense is just performing too good. They're clicking on all cylinders. Michael Thomas is almost impossible to stop. Alvin Kamara feels like he's finally gotten back on track. He's got 4 rushing touchdowns the last 2 weeks. And Drew Brees is just lighting up the skies. It just feels like it's way too much to overcome for this Vikings team. And I'll take the Saints to win. And we're moving on to our last game. You got the number 5 Seattle Seahawks, number 5th seed in the NFC, going to Philadelphia to take on the 4th-seeded Eagles. This is the most confusing matchup of all the games this weekend. It can honestly go either way. It really could. And you're thinking, well, it's the Seahawks. They got to go to the East Coast. It's going to be outdoors. They've historically struggled there. Yes. Historically, yes. But this season, no. As the Seahawks are a bunch of road warriors this year. Going a combined 7-1 on road games this year. That's tied for the best record in the league. That's pretty good, ain't it? And speaking of road wins, they walked into Philadelphia in Week 12 this season and beat the Eagles. Granted, it was a very sloppy game. The Eagles turned the ball over 5 times and only lost by 6 points. It was low scoring. It was ugly. Ugly. But these two teams feel a lot different than what those two teams were Week 12, don't they? Seattle's got a new look backfield, and the Eagles are suddenly playing with confidence. They feel like two drastically different teams. Here's what we know about the Seahawks, though. They like to run the football, don't they? And they showed they can still do that last week versus San Francisco. They racked up, like 150 rushing yards with Marshawn Lynch, Travis Homer, who looked good in spurts. And so they're going to come out and try to run the football. It's what they do every single week, no matter who they're playing. There's just one problem with that. As the Eagles have proven to be one of the best running defenses in the entire league. They're the number 3 rush defense. That's how they finished the regular season, as the number 3 rush defense, averaging giving up 90.1 rush yards per game. The weakness of that Philly defense, though, it's their secondary. They can be beat. I know they've been playing better lately, but I am confident that they can be beat. After watching these last couple of weeks, that's their Achilles heel. If you just start gripping and ripping it downfield on them, I don't think they can stop you. And Seattle still has Tyler Lockett. They still got DK Metcalf. And Russell Wilson still has magic in him. So, just need dangerous Russell Wilson to just start pulling rabbits out of hats, and the Seahawks should be just fine. For Philly, they're confident now. They have a home game, and people are counting them out. Sound familiar to anybody? The entire bedrock of their Super Bowl winning season was built on what they are right now. A team with injuries, a team that everybody is counting out. They believe it's them against the world. It's the Super Bowl run all over again, people. This team relishes the underdog role. Remember that Super Bowl one when they were wearing dog masks on the field after games? Because they were the underdogs. Nobody believed in them. And now here they are with everybody trash talking them and saying the NFC East is a joke. They should give up their playoff spot to somebody else. The media sat there and gave them what they wanted. They believe it's them against the world. And now they're sitting here against a beatable Seahawks team. It's almost like history repeating itself. It really is. The Eagles are banged up. I mean, what's new? Zach Ertz has his jacked up ribs. It sounds like he really might not go, which means Dallas Goedert will be the starting tight end. Offensive lineman Johnson was limited in practice. I mean, it's the same old for the Eagles. They got injuries everywhere, but they're somehow still finding ways to scrounge around and be there. It's going to come down to Carson Wentz making a bunch of plays. He's probably going to have to throw the ball like 40 to 50 times, which feels like the norm the last 4 weeks. Throw like 45 times for 330 yards, 2 to 3 touchdowns to give the Eagles a chance. Now, like I said, this game can honestly go either way, in my opinion. I would not be stunned if the Eagles won, and I wouldn't be stunned if the Seahawks won. It's going to be close. It's going to be low scoring. I don't want to say low scoring. Maybe like a 27-24 final or a 24-21 final. A scoreline like that. It's going to come down to the wire, and it should be fun. It really should be fun. I'm going to take the Seahawks to win it, though. It's just, I don't know. It's just I believe that the Seahawks are one of the better teams in the NFC the entire season, and just because they're going on the road against the Eagles team, I shouldn't doubt them. I'm going with the Seahawks to win, but I wouldn't be stunned if the Eagles do it. So that's it for this week's show. A much shorter show, but since we're in the playoff times and there's less games to talk about, this should be what you expect. Less game previews and recaps, and more segments like what we did earlier with Let's Get Real. So I promised a special announcement at the end of the show, and here's what it is. Effective this coming week, so starting this Monday, the recap show will now be recorded and released on Mondays. Because, full disclosure, I go back to college this coming Monday, and Tuesdays and Thursdays are now going to be impossible to sit down and write and record on. So we're going to switch the schedule around. Recap shows will now be available for the public on Monday. So that's the big announcement. Friday shows will stay the same, and we're going to keep this pattern of Monday and Friday shows all the way till the week after the Super Bowl, where we'll do something different. So that was the big announcement, and that's it for our preview show. Thanks for stopping by. I hope everybody enjoys Wild Card Weekend. Should be a fun one. We got a bunch of good games, and I'll talk to everybody Tuesday. Oh, I was just thinking in my head, don't say Tuesday, say Monday. And what do? I say Tuesday. I will see you all Monday, where we will recap all 4 of these games and talk about any news that has happened since then. So thanks for stopping by, and I'll talk to you Monday. Bye.